Hello and welcome to Exploring Global Problems, a podcast where we talk to academics from Swansea University whose groundbreaking research is tackling global challenges, from health innovation to sustainable futures and the environment, from digital technologies to clean energy. My name is Sam Blaxland, and today I'm joined by Dr Gulzat Botoeva, Senior Lecturer in Criminology here at Swansea. Gulzat's research focuses on understanding illegal economic activities, specifically in the Central Asian region, looking at how global transformations impact the economy and politics in small communities, and how these communities respond to those changes. Gulzat, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Sam.
It's good to see you. Tell me, just to begin, why this topic?
Why this topic? I think we should start then from my MA dissertation, when I actually started doing my MA dissertation at Essex University. And I was trying to explore different types of themes and topics. And I think one of the reasons why I actually started doing research, which is slightly different from what I will be talking about today, but that's how I think I came also to the topic of small-scale gold mining. When I was exploring different topics for my MA dissertation, I really wanted to do something on drugs in Central Asia and Kyrgyzstan, and doing research on drug trafficking, which is actually one of the biggest and hottest topics because there is a route of drug trafficking from Afghanistan through Central Asia to Russia and Europe. That was really kind of, dangerous and very difficult topic. So when I was actually speaking to some of my colleagues back in Kyrgyzstan, one of my colleagues told me that there is a community which actually does hashish production, which is actually a resin made out of the marijuana plants. So I started doing research on this kind of, mountainous community where people, just local people who were never called themselves criminals, never called themselves as part of the criminal organization, but they were part of this kind of illegal, activity. And then when I finished that research, I decided, okay, like what's next, what I can do next. And I was really kind of interested again in another kind of mountainous region and local people. And at the time, I was also reading a lot of other material as well. And that was around in 2017 when I also read about gold mining happening in another part of Kyrgyzstan, and where people were actually going into the Naryn River. If you know the region, Naryn is actually very mountainous, much higher than even the region where I did my research on hashish, which was the Sikul. And they were actually panning gold in winter in freezing cold, like minus 20, minus 30 degrees Celsius. And also there were lots of other kind of, news happening as well about protests, that people were protesting about official mining or some other mining companies coming in. So that kind of, really interested me because it was also about the, mountainous region, and how then, local people started doing something which was considered, again, illegal or at least informal from the perspective of the government.
Very interesting. It relates to some extent to your background, your time growing up as well, doesn't it, your research? Because am I right in saying you're from Kyrgyzstan?
Yes, I am from Kyrgyzstan, yeah.
Tell me about that and what growing up there was what growing up there was like.
I actually grew up in the capital city in Bishkek, but my grandparents lived in one of the also rural areas in Chongkemin area, and all our holidays we used to spend. That was the requirement from grandparents' side. We had to be in their place basically every single holiday until I finished my school. So I'm very familiar with kind of rural communities. The culture. I also speak Kyrgyz language. Kyrgyzstan is a bilingual country, so we have two languages, Russian and Kyrgyz. So for me, it was always something that I was part of. Sometimes people say, "Oh, you're coming from the city. Do you really understand us?" There's a little bit of a division as well, like between the city people and the rural people as well. But because I was always part of that, I really wanted to study.
I'm normally quite good with my geography, but I'm pretty sure I couldn't pinpoint Kyrgyzstan on a map, which is terrible. Where exactly is it? What countries border it?
So Kyrgyzstan borders with China on the east, Kazakhstan on the north, Uzbekistan on the west, and then Tajikistan in the south. Yeah. So it's right in the middle of the Central Asian region.
Great. And obviously, because it's probably quite unfamiliar to people, well, it certainly is to me, and I assume to a wider readership as well, that obviously that provides quite a lot of opportunities to do research there for you, doesn't it? Because there's things that most people probably don't know about or understand that you can shed some light on.
I mean, obviously, yes, but there are also a lot of other people who actually done research in Kyrgyzstan,
Sure.
because I think within the Central Asian region, Kyrgyzstan, for a certain period of time, was actually quite open for researchers, academics. And actually, if you speak to the experts in the Central Asian region, there are quite a lot of them from the West who actually done the research in Kyrgyzstan because of those kind of reasons. So comparatively, because it was much open. Yeah. But yes, obviously, yes. Kyrgyzstan is one of the countries which is still need, or Central Asian region in general. I think it still needs more research done, and explore more. To show that the problems that are not only very specific to the region itself, but actually, what I'm trying to do in my studies is that actually to show how global and macro kind of level changes and transformations, they actually affect people. And maybe we are talking about people, somewhere in the mountains, in the mountainous regions. But actually, they're really connected to global kind of, problems and transformations happening.
In what sort of way? What have you focused on?
So, for instance, in both of my studies on hashish production and also on the small scale gold mining, I look at, for instance, how Kyrgyzstan is becoming much more, or has become much more neoliberal, kind of market economy oriented, and how then it affects people basically. How then the privatization of land happens, and then how it affects the livelihoods of people basically. How then government also withdraws the welfare state, which used to be there, and then how it also affects, the people who are actually really in a vulnerable kind of situations with lots of kids, or with people who actually cannot work, etc., etc.
Now, I know that with the gold mining work that you were talking
Yeah.
about there, particularly the panning for gold in the freezing temperatures, etc., you've actually spoken to some of the people who were involved in that process, haven't you? What was it like doing those interviews?
Those interviews, I mean, it really depends. I mean, I have talked to people who were penning. I have also talked to people who actually mine as well. On the one hand, people do really want to tell their stories as well, and they, speak about it openly and tell you what is happening. And sometimes, especially in my last publication that I published on this topic, I talk about the protests, and people really also speak about how they protest as well. But sometimes, because there was much media attention, especially during the protest times, and the way how people were portrayed, in some of the publications, made some of the people be a bit kind of, aware of it as well. So not all people be willingly kind of speaking to you. But because I have been in the region not once, I did actually my research starting from 2017 till 2021. So every summer I just used to go to Naryn region and then speak to them. So it also changes then the dynamic, and some people speak a bit more when it's quieter, when it's not like the media paying so much attention to them and tell you the stories as well. Yeah.
How do you recruit these people for interviews? How do you convince them to speak to you, and where even do you actually do the interviews? Have you done them in quite interesting places?
Usually in people's houses. Yeah. The way how I was trying to talk to people was that I had 3 different research assistants throughout these years. So first, initially, I had a research assistant who had some kind of connections. So we just basically tried to talk to them. And then, it's this called snowballing kind of, sampling. through them, you kind of, speak to them and then say, can we also speak to some of your friends or to some of the people that you work with? We also have spoken to the local administration as well. So there are local authorities. We have also spoken to the heads of the local authorities or some of the members of the different kind of NGOs. So it's not only like the people who actually either mine or even in some of the cases, we were just speaking to people in the villages and what do they actually think about the gold mining themselves.
Mm. Any particular moments that jump out as being quite memorable from that interviewing experience?
Maybe not the interviewing itself, but I was also part of the some of the discussions, for instance, which were going on in the villages because they were in the period of kind of protests. And I remember that was my, I think, second visit to the area, and I had a different research assistant. And I remember in one of the meetings where the villagers were talking, how they're gonna actually strategize in a larger meeting, which is gonna happen. Some of them said, "Oh, you shouldn't be here." And my research assistant was really, really scared. So he left. And I went back and listened because it was a public meeting. It wasn't something, closed. It was happening on the street. So I went back, and then my research assistant was saying, like, "Oh my God, you're so brave. You're not, you're not afraid."
Were you afraid?
Not really. I mean, it wasn't. I wasn't going in like into something which was completely closed off. It was a public discussion, basically, in the village.
Can you tell us more about the protests?
So the protests were happening. My publication focuses on two different protests. So one of them kind of led to the second one. And the first one was much larger. It was actually involved more than 1,000 people. And that's quite a lot, actually, for a mountainous region. And it happened for like 3 days. People were even putting up yurts, not leaving, blocking the roads. That was against one of the Chinese mining companies, which started mining gold in. So they basically bought the license for investigation and also the production of gold in the existing mining site. And people were actually protesting against that. The second protest happened actually against of a smaller mining site, which was owned by a Kyrgyz company, which was very unusual. But that involved slightly different kind of villages because they all were connected to different mining sites, kind of in a different way from each other. So these two different protests that I was trying to kind of analyze about.
Mm. And how did they funnel into some of the research that you did and some of the conclusions that you drew as well?
So what I am trying to say is that because when you start the research on gold mining in Kyrgyzstan, especially in that part of the region, there is always this kind of portrayal of the protest and the protesters. Is that actually it is happening because of the selfish reasons? That people actually just want to hold this kind of mining process because they are themselves interested in illegal mining. So that is the kind of the discourse and the narrative that the government always kind of has, and the media, some of the media also was also representing that in that way, and that's why that was the reason why some of the people didn't want to talk. But what I was trying to do based on interviews, not only, during that time in 2019, so the protest happened in August 2019, but because I already started research in 2017 and been already involved in interviews much before that, I draw on my knowledge also based on those kind of interviews. And what I'm trying to say and argue is that actually that discourse is only one kind of narrative. And in order to understand the protest and also to understand why actually some people support, because it wasn't like everyone was actually against. There were also some groups of people who were saying, no, let's, the companies to work, let them work and let them continue. So it kind of led to the conflict within the region as well. People become divided. People stop talking to each other. So what I was trying to say, I am trying to say that actually we need to understand some kind of also underlying conditions and the tensions, and then that actually they're part of either other kind of extraction projects as well. So for instance, it's not only gold mining, but also because people also been getting some money loans from the crediting unions, like from the banks, and that is also already kind of type of extraction from people, because the interest rate, you would be really surprised to hear, almost up to 40% that they have to pay, and that's quite a lot, right? Their decision, for instance, not to participate in the protests and actually support the mining companies could be because they've been selected by those mining companies, official mining companies, as workers, and they receive the salaries, but they use those kind of salaries as a collateral for the loan that they received from the banks. And if they cannot pay them back because the salary paid by the mining companies is 10 or 15 times more than they can earn as people who actually work. Or there, I was also trying to argue that actually some of the illegal miners who worked, and collected some kind of wealth, they also invested their money into the livestock, and they started increasing the number of sheep and horses and cows that they actually own. So for them, pastures become really important, and then the nature and the pastures and the mining in that region mainly happens in high pastures, and the mining usually affect and then either because they build roads or pollution happens, and all other kind of things. So it's not just because what I'm trying to argue is not just because people selfishly mine, but also they change their strategies and the livelihoods, and they also invested in the livestock as well, and they're trying to protect basically that, and therefore they are protesting against it as well. But I also try to kind of look at it as another kind of extraction project, so it's kind of a tension between those as well. And then there are also people who actually support maybe mining company because they also receive the salary, but they were saying that actually they are afraid that they're not going to be given the social benefits which they used to receive prior to their husbands, for instance, start working in the mining site.
I mean, you've written about, this is a quote, the complex situation in which most rural communities find themselves. And I suppose, in a nutshell, that's what you're saying here. This is what we're discussing. This is the complicated situation.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is that actually, instead of just kind of portraying it in one way, we actually need to understand the socio-economic conditions. And it's not really, although it is a rural community, obviously, but I think we also need to understand that people develop different livelihood strategies as well. So there are people who already become much more rich, and they obviously then invested. That's one of the livelihood strategies which actually been supported even by the government and even by the international organizations, that they actually invest into the livestock, and that's how they become not reliable on the governmental funds and other things.
And in the medium to long term, what kind of impact are you hoping this research is going to have?
Oh, that's a very hard question. I'm hoping that that this kind of research and really discussing the socio-economic conditions, we at least maybe the governments, maybe other organizations, they really pay attention, to the situation in the region, and then they don't just kind of basically criminalize, because one of the answers to this kind of protest is actually criminalization of people and protesters, and basically taking them to court without actually understanding that the situation is it is rooted basically in what has been done either by government or by international organizations, and it's based on the livelihoods of people.
Well, it's been a fascinating conversation. Like I say, it was something I was very unfamiliar with, and I feel like I've learned something, and I'm going to look into it more. But thank you, Gulzat. That was great.
Thank you so much.
If you want to find out more about Gulzat's research, you can visit her staff profile page on Swansea University's website. To find out more about this podcast and Swansea University's research, visit swansea.ac.uk/research. That's all from us today. Thanks for listening, and thank you once again to my guest, Dr Gulzat Botoeva. If you've enjoyed this episode, please follow us. I'm Sam Blaxland, and that was Exploring Global Problems from Swansea University.